Okay, good morning, everyone. So my name is Swagato Sarkar, and I am a faculty member at Calcutta University and in the School of Public Policy. So, there was a little bit of a problem with the technology here because my connection was not working. The internet was slightly slow, and so I'm talking to you from my mobile phone. So hopefully, it's okay right now. So, what I'm going to talk to you today is about how the pandemic has panned out and the pan on to it. So, and how the state has acted. So, which means that what we are looking at is the relationship between the state and the pandemic. And I'm going to teach you a course on the state and public policy and governance. Uh, so, uh, so this, in a way, is the inaugural lecture of that course. So, if you see the COVID pandemic has been uh, the COVID pandemic has been described as a black swan event, which means that an event which cannot be predicted. If you see the financial crisis of 2008 was a shock which was induced by the market failure, and so there's an agency, or you can find the causes for it, and also correspondingly you can go and rectify it. So in the financial crisis of 2008, we know the reasons for that failure, which is basically a market failure, and then there are certain interventions. Similarly, civil wars take place in various countries because of the state failure. The governments in those various countries, they collapse and the societies divide themselves and fight. Similarly, if you look into the natural disasters like the famine and flood and cyclone, these are all shocks which are localized. And nowadays, many of these can be predicted. But the spread of coronavirus was different to all of this because it had a very high case fatality rate, and so all the countries were caught unawares. So, and as a result of that, most of the countries took very cautionary approach, and they closed their borders, they closed their economies, and people were asked to stay at home, as we all know. So, this is for the first time, perhaps in the last few centuries, that the whole world came to a grinding halt in a synchronous manner. All the countries at the same time. There's not too many instances of this happening. So indeed, we are in an historical moment in that sense. Now, the point is, what is it telling us about the state? So in the last almost 3 decades now, with the advent of the neoliberal paradigm, which advocated the role of market in governing our lives and structuring our everyday interactions. One of the centerpiece of that ideology was to have a much more limited state and government, and allow the private players to have a greater role. So the political scientist Susan Strange, her name is Susan Strange, in 1996, she came up with this idea or a phrase called the retreat of the state. And her argument was that the territory-based sovereign nation states are losing power in the era of globalization, and in its place, you have the non-territorial commercial authority which have developed, particularly the MNCs and so on, and say the Britain, the World Bank and IMF and all these institutions. So all the Bretton Woods institutions. So this is the new architecture of power which has emerged in the world, where the territory-based authority has gone down and the rise of non-territorial commercial authority has been observed. So she calls it retreat of the state because the state is no longer at the center, the market is. Now, what the COVID crisis has done is that before that, when the 2008 financial crisis, the state had come back, it had intervened, but in a very specific localized sector. But after almost, as I said, 3 decades, or even slightly more than that, the state for the first time has come back in the sense that state is at the center of our life, governing our life. It has become omnipotent and omnipresent. So that whole idea of retreat of the state all of a sudden seems to have gone out, and what you have is the returning of the state. So the idea here is that how do we understand what is going on? What is this state coming back and being at the center of our life means? So far, there are 3 debates which have been taking place. In a way, if you have followed the literature on the state, then these are slightly familiar debates or lines of debates. So number 1 is the trade-off between freedom and privacy and security. So freedom and privacy and security. So the trade-off is that. So which one do you want? More security from the virus, or you want more freedom and privacy? So this is the debate which is in America. We have seen that people refusing to wear masks, claiming that they restrict their freedom. They are refusing to stay at home because it again restricts their freedom from going out, venturing out, and so on. So that's one debate which has been taken. And this is taking place vis-a-vis the expansion of control and surveilling of our bodies by the state. The second debate is around the efficiency and competency of the state in containing the spread of the virus. And the third debate is the exclusion of marginalized people from healthcare facilities and the sacrifice of older people in the process of rational allocation of critical care. Now, this is something we have seen in Europe, in Italy, for instance, at one point when their hospitals were overwhelmed with incoming patients. So then they decided that who should get, say, the ventilator and ICU and all of that. And many a time they would choose people who are in their prime, a lot of working age left. And so they, in a way, allowed the older people with comorbidity issues to die. So as a result, in Italy, the initial figures were very high. So that's what we have seen. Now, but the question is that what does it tell us about the nature of the state in this kind of a milieu? So to begin with, this entire debate was started arguably by an Italian philosopher called Giorgio Agamben. I'm not sure how many of you have heard his name. He's very popular, very important philosopher of our times. So he has this theory called state of exception. So what he means by that, that it is a condition, it is a time where the political condition, where the law is suspended, all the constitutional provisions are suspended. The citizens are stripped of their legal rights, and therefore the state becomes almost absolute. So vis-a-vis the state, we don't have any power. There's no law, no constitution, etc. So we are, in a way, the state has absolute power to do what. So it calls an exceptional state, the situation. And that is what he calls a state of exception. So he says that what this pandemic has done for the government is that it's normalizing this state of exceptions, that this is the way to do. So it has offered an opportunity for the governments to instill fear, to curtail movements, and to deny access to the institutions and suspend the activities of everyday life. So what has happened is that a collective fear has gripped the entire society, and the desire for safety has been increased. So in that process, what has happened? A new regulatory regime has been established, which limits people's freedoms. And in that process, what is happening, what Agamben argues, that we are trading off our experience and demand of living a what he calls qualified political life And this is a distinction which comes from Aristotle, bios and zoe. So bios means that it's a political life of rights of citizens, the right to participate in the organization and governance of the society and so on. And on the other hand, you had the another form of living which is simply called the zoe, which means that Z-O-E. So that zoe, which means a reproductive life, just like an animal. Animals don't, come together to have a conference and convene and discuss issues and so on. So he's saying the same thing, that there are two forms of life. One is the life of living like a citizen with rights and all, where you hold the government accountable. It is as in the words of Abraham Lincoln, is the government for the people, by the people, of the people. So, so that is one form of idea of government. And the other form of, or one form idea of a political life, which is the bios. And the other form is simply like animals. That we need to survive, we need food, we need shelter, we need protection from it. So we don't have what is known as the agency. We don't have the ability to decide and act on our own. We depend on others. So that's the. So he's saying, Agamben is saying that what this pandemic has offered us, because it's classically a medical condition, so it has all of a sudden created this survival has become more important than our political life. And so through these various kind of executive orders, all the governments are basically creating this paradigm of state of exception. There's another very interesting philosopher. His name is Byung Chul Han, Byung hyphen CHUL by Byung Chul Han, HAN Han. So he is of South Korean descent, and he lives in and grew up in Germany. So he's a Korean German philosopher. His writings are very interesting, particularly on very contemporary issues. So he says that, look, what is happening here is what we are witnessing here is a shifting paradigm of power. In the Cold War area, he calls that Europe had developed what he calls immunological paradigm. Why is it called immunological? Because the whole entire idea is that there is like our immunity system in our body, which fights an external enemy or anything which comes to our body. Our immune system first tries to fight it. So this immunological paradigm is like that Europe as a body will have to fight everything that is foreign and what it considers as an enemy. So the way it created or secured itself was by creating fence around it. It created borders and fences and tried to prevent the circulation of goods and capital, which was in a way very protectionist kind of a paradigm. Now, what has happened is that after the globalization, all these borders, etc., were either relaxed, and people were, and goods and capital were allowed to move. So, all of a sudden, it looked that the immunological paradigm is gone and a new paradigm has come in after the globalization. Now, he says that what COVID has done is that COVID has brought back that immunological paradigm. All of a sudden, you have an external, invisible, unknown enemy. And the only way of fighting it is to close the border, ban the entry of foreigners, because Europe was the first to ban flights, if you remember. So all of a sudden, it, in a way, went into the cocoon. It went into a shell and tried to protect itself from the external world. And the health facilities, the European countries had, it all of a sudden became extremely sensitive that it will only be available to its own citizens, not for outsiders. Outsiders will have to pay or something like that. But in a way, it has not. Han argues that even with all of this, Europe has not managed to control the disease very well. Whereas, if you look into the East Asia, China, South Korea, Taiwan in particular, they have been extremely successful in doing so. And they have been able to do that with the use of technology. So what it had created is that it created a digit. But not only during this COVID, they have been trying to putting this in place for some time now. Isn't what he calls the digital surveillance system, where the government is continuously collecting enormous amount of data from the mobile networks, the operators and the telecom operators, the internet data servers, the ISPs and all of that. So everything that we do and interact with the technology, with the mobile phone, computer, etc., all of the data is collected by the state, and the state tries to create and 360-degree view of every citizen of the individual. So there's a database of the citizens, similar to our biometric system, Aadhaar. And then if you, on that, if you impose all the data, then every citizen becomes visible to the state. What you are doing, whom you are interacting with, all of that, the state gets to know it, which obviously is a curtailment of our freedom. It's an invasion into our privacy as a citizen. So what it did is that, as a result, there is and this is possible in places like China because there is no data protection, there is no right to privacy, and so in a way the citizens are exposed to the government. And when the COVID came, so the government already knew who the citizens are, whom they are interacting with, etc. So the moment one person is identified as infected, then it's also very easy for the state to map whom this person is interacting with. So this whole idea of contact tracing becomes much easier. So you can go and identify that individual, isolate, and put that person in the home quarantine. You also go and trace all the people that this person has been in touch with and interacted with, and then go and test them and see whether they're positive or negative. And thereby, it's a much easier way of identifying the infected person and isolating them and quarantining. So he says that this, what the perverse thing about this, through this, all these countries have managed to both increase the number of tests, do it in an effective manner with the use of technology, and also had a very elaborate surveillance. Now, all of this was possible because of this surveillance system which has been put in place. So he fears that, Han fears that this will become the new paradigm. Not the state of exception of that, simply about suspending law, but that technology can make everybody. State will know exactly what is going on. In the future, the state will know what is my body temperature, whether what is my blood sugar level, what is the blood pressure, and all of that. Because instruments like, say, the Apple Watch or any of those smart watches that you might be wearing, all of those are capturing data, which is watch is processing for us and showing us in a particular way. But in all likelihood, the moment you synchronize your watch with your phone, and that data goes into the Apple or any other company's server. And then the problem is that if the state has access to it, then the state is also knowing what is happening with your body. Now that gives an enormous power to the state, because the state can now, in a way, customize its power towards what has to be done, what needs to be done. So he says that this digital surveillance and digital policing, this might become the paradigm, because this is successful, this is extremely powerful. This is not based on law or any of those things. It's an infrastructure. And then most of the countries can start buying this infrastructure and start implementing in there. And that's the perverse impact or the adverse impact of the COVID and the COVID's lasting legacy in that sense. Now, what has been the Indian experience? So this is mostly the European debate. Now, what is the Indian experience that we have seen? We have seen that the state immediately went for the Disaster Management Act of 2005 to categorize this virus outbreak as a disaster. So that's why Disaster Management Act. And the Disaster Management Act provides power to the state to do what Agamben was saying, suspend various kind of normally available rights to the citizen, centralized power, override the central government can do the Disaster Management Act. If a national disaster is announced, then the central government can bypass the state governments or and directly go and intervene into the society. You will have to remember that health is on the state list. So the state has more power on the health rather than the central government. But here, Disaster Management Act centralizes the power and gives it to the central government, and which can then override any of the state governments. So therefore, through that, once that was invoked, then the lockdown was announced. So there's a legal basis of announcing the lockdown in India, imposing curfew or the night curfews in most of the cities. Then the provision on the gathering of people, like any of the any kind of disturbances where those section 144 is imposed and gathering of people is imposed. So similar kind of thing happened here. The transport system was suspended, was closed, and so on. Then the government also brought in the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897, so it's from the British era. That act was brought in to impose social distancing and isolation. So, but what we have also noticed is that when the government was invoking all of these and implementing, the metaphor used in this process was the war cry, that this is a war against corona. And the new warriors are the medical professionals and the doctors and all. So these are the new warriors, the new soldiers. So we need Janta curfew, then light and sound and all of that. So in that way, it seems like, it's a war which is, we are all going, but this is a war which is going to happen or happening in our drawing rooms and our neighborhood. And so we are all participants in this war. And we need to, that state is going to save us from the invader. Now, Western governments were in a way indecisive because they were operating with this trade-off. Yes. Should we curtail the freedom of the citizens, or should we, override that and have make security as the main concern? So in India, what we saw is that that's not the concern of the government. The government just went ahead with the lockdown without bothering about any other thing. And as a result, we create a very harsh, which everybody, it's widely argued that it's the harshest in the world. So that was it. So what it brought in, also another new thing which happened as the government was imposing all this and imposing its own authority on the state. So another interesting thing which happened is that earlier, if you see most of the time, the response that most of Indians will have, or even in the whole of the South subcontinent, that the moment a disease of this kind breaks out or broke out in the earlier stages, people will create a new deity. So when the smallpox came, it had given rise to the deity called Sitala. And so many of these deities, very localized deities, are there all over India for each of these, the diseases. For the first time in India, the disease or an epidemic of this scale has not given birth to any kind of deity. People have not gone to the usual babas or mandir or mazar or masjid or wherever to offer prayers and get remedy and cure. People have not done that. People have followed the quote unquote the scientific directives of the state. They have been applying sanitizer, washing their hands, wearing masks, and all of that. In a way, even if they are not doing it wholeheartedly, but that remains the paradigm which people in a way accept. Even they might be violating it, they might not be wearing the mask when people know. But what they are not doing is that they are not invoking gods and goddesses to help them. There are some fringe group always. In a country of 1.3 million, 1.4 billion people, we expect the fringe groups to do something. So that has happened. But on the large, the authority of the state has prevailed, not the authority of the gods. And what is also important that the various kind of attempts at cure all these various kind of quacks who come up and to offer all kind of remedies. That has also not happened. Even Ayurveda has not been prescribed as a cure for any of the diseases, but Ayurveda has been promoted as offering the immunity boost as an immunity booster, various kind of kadha and all of those things that people have been making and drinking. Similarly, if you see that Patanjali company, it came up with the coronal kit. So immediately it was discredited by the same government agencies which were otherwise patronizing this company. And they were told to stop promoting it as a cure for COVID. And it was allowed in the market to exist as an immunity boosting product. From it claimed to be a cure, government objected to it, then it moved being an immunity boosting product. So in a way, what you see is an hegemony of the Western medicine, which was accepted as a paradigm. So the only solution was seen as vaccine. The vaccine is not there, so the whole world was told to wait for it. And then there were also attempts to, to jump the usual procedural procedures of trials of various stages, the 3-stage trial of the vaccine before it is brought into the market. So many countries, India also at one point was trying to announce the India-made vaccine on the 15th of August, and then there were a lot of hue and cry that it might not be the right thing to do, and then that didn't come. But in the meanwhile, Russia has gone ahead and announced a vaccine. There is concern that whether it has actually followed all the procedures stringently. There is an announcement day before yesterday from China that they are also bringing out a vaccine, and there's again a concern that they might not have gone through all the procedures. Various companies around the world are doing it. So many of these are also obviously the public relations organizations are extremely active in promoting one of the two companies. AstraZeneca and Oxford University is producing, so that obviously has a massive promotion. Because whoever can come up with the right vaccine is going to have a worldwide huge market for it, and billions of dollars will be spent in immunizing the entire population. So it's a big business. The big pharma is behind this vaccine thing, but that's not the debate that we are having. The debate is that none of the traditional medicines are capable of preventing it. It's the Western medicine which is going to give us a cure, the scientific cure, and we need to wait for it. That's the only. In between, we had the herd immunity and all of that was where nothing seems to be working, and the virus has its own mind. It's going at its own pace. It's infecting people in India increasingly. For the last 18 days, India has been topping the number of new cases in the whole world. We are very close to Brazil now, and maybe by the first week of September, India will overtake Brazil and take the second slot. And if it continues in this way, then by the end of the year, India will be number one in the number of infected people, surpassing the USA. So all of that is happening. Now look at what the Minister of Home Affairs was doing through various regular directives. What it was doing is basically, theoretically, if you have to understand it, then what it was trying to do is that you have individual bodies and you have the space of the nation, the space of the city. And the idea was, how do you distribute these bodies at various places? How do you demarcate, segregate this space into certain zones and then place these infected and non-infected bodies and demarcate and regulate? So that was the basic idea. And because there's no medicine, so the only thing that you can therefore go and detect, your only way of handling this situation is to go and detect the infected bodies. And what we have also got is a completely new language, which has become all of a sudden in the last 5-6 months, that everybody's common parlance. We now talk about testing, isolation, contact tracing, doubling rates, social distancing, flattening the car, quarantine. These are all things like an vocabulary that we have got used to in the last 5 months. In a way, this virus and this infection should have been a secular process. In the secular, in the sense that it's not attached to any identities or any origin. It's free of any kind of incumbents. But what we saw is that, so in a way, an infected body is indistinguishable from another. So a body of a Muslim infected body will be indistinguishable from Hindu body or Christian body or any other. Similarly, caste-wise, as well, a Brahmin body and a Dalit body will be same. But what we saw is that that's not where it remained, even with all this kind of thing. What it then immediately broke into was that there was a search for the identity of the origin of the virus, and it was found to be Chinese. Donald Trump, for instance, continuously calls it Kung Fu virus, Chinese virus, and so on. And in India as well, there were doubts that it came from China. It was China's war, and particularly around the Galwan Valley conflict recently, that got much more reinforced that China has unleashed this virus on the world, like a biological warfare. Similarly, the idea that who is the victor of this virus, meaning that who carries this virus, who are the super spreaders. So we saw in India, immediately there were the Tablighi Jamaat were targeted in the Nizamuddin area of Delhi. There were people who had come, congregated, and apparently they were the people who were responsible for spreading this disease. For almost initial 1 month, that was the discourse which our popular media and the official tweets, the police actions, all of that pointed out. So it's a vilification of a particular community which happened. And also what we have seen that the stricter the district administration were in implementing of the segregationist policies, the more they were valorized as a role model. So Bhilwara in Rajasthan and Agra in Uttar Pradesh were the early success models because they had implemented this in a vigorous way. People were, so basically a coercive model of policing which came. The police would beat up people if they were seen on the streets. They were forced to go into in their houses. If house was infected, then the whole house would be plastered with posters, red-colored posters, and they'll be strictly monitored. And in a way, they would be boycotted. So almost the administration boycotts them, and the rest of the neighborhoods were asked to not to have any kind of contact with this. So those were seen as an early success model. Soon, all of that went away, and the virus, as I said, that took its own course. And what also we have seen in this military scientific kind of a discourse which came, which you also saw, is the emergence of the new kind of experts who emerged. So you had the doctors, and then they were joined by the epidemiologists, economists, and statisticians, bureaucrats. All of a sudden, this is a new grouping which happened, who were doing all kind of graphs and projecting the number of cases. They were offering advice, they were analyzing their opinions, and all of a sudden they became very visible. But were they autonomous in the sense that they could act whatever they wanted? No, that was not the case, which happened. What we found very interesting is that, in the debate of the Indian state, and I will wrap up my talk with this, that what this pandemic has shown us about the nature of the Indian state is that the first, that the Indian state is not concerned about the security freedom trade-off. So that's not the debate we can have in India. The government doesn't care about any government. It's not about the central government. It's also the state government of various political parties. None of them seem to be concerned about the freedom of the citizens. They're more concerned about the security, and we as individuals are also don't have a huge demand, or we don't provide premium to freedom. We are much more concerned about our security, and as a result, we are much more inclined to accept the state the directives. And what the state has come to mean is basically a certain elite group within every political party who matters, not the entire, even not the entire political party. And the state can very easily in India, therefore, deploy the police force. But the rest of the branches of the state, they remain weak. Our medical system is very weak. Our social services are weak. So the moment the rest of the things which needs to be done, we find that's where the state is lacking. So we have been hearing horror stories from the hospitals and various other places. That brings to the second issue, which is the issue of governance. Now, you might have heard about this American political scientist named Francis Fukuyama. So he has defined governance as an ability, a government's ability to make and enforce rules and to deliver services. So in a way, governance focuses on the performance of the executive branch, which basically very narrowly means the performance of the bureaucracy. So instead of focusing on the bureaucracy, if we understand governance as a functional orientation of a government and how we increase its power and resources, then we'll see that what this brief history of COVID control in India and its consequences have told us about the Indian state is that the basic characteristics of the Indian state has not changed. It has remained strong in terms of deploying the police force, but weaker when it comes to any other social interfaces, social welfare, social services. So in a way, it has a very weak, one limb is very weak and another limb is very strong. So there is a asymmetry in that use of power. So in the debate on Indian state, the scholars have argued two things. One is that what is the role that Indian state is good at playing? The Indian state historically has played a central role in organizing social and economic interest in the society. And on the other hand, the dominant caste and classes, which are together known as the dominant groups, they have enormous influence on the conduct of the states. So this is M.Phil, the sociologist who said this. And as a result, what happens is that the informality permeates the systems of governance in India, and it develops various kind of patron-client relationship where strong patrons extract resources from the state. And in that process, it severely curtails the capacity of the state to intervene. Public policy interventions and its implementations are ineffective in most of the cases. So Indian state therefore has an anomalous structure, in the sense that it can amass and arrogate power to itself, invoking emergency laws and displacing opposition forces. But it doesn't know how to use that power in a prudent manner. So it can very easily use the police and coercive power to make it, or in a short term, to direct the conduct of its people, use of masks, hand sanitizer, and so on. But it fails or is inefficient in creating a long-term social change and developing a social infrastructure. So in a way, therefore, the state acts in an ad hoc manner, in a short-term basis. So this was the first time that all the social groups that M.Phil and others are talking about, they were neutralized. They were not playing any important role. They were not exerting any pressure on the state. So in that sense, the state was free from all these social interferences. Yet, the state acted the way it has always done. So that brings to the third and the last point that I want to mention here, is that if the fundamental character of the Indian state has not changed, but the executive branch is free from the social pressure, then that points to a new kind of hegemony and decision-making apparatus. Now, the historian, some of you might have studied the historian Ranajit Guha, is famous for establishing the subaltern studies in India. So he has defined hegemony as a condition where dominance, uh, in the what happens in a hegemony comprises two things. One is the dominance, and then you have persuasion and coercion. So he says that in this, a condition of dominance happens when the coercion is more than the persuasion. And what it, in a dynamic way, what it does is that for the consolidation of the power, it also opens up itself to some kind of resistances so that it can modify, the power can modify itself. So power has two components. One is dominance and another is resistance. Within the dominance, you have persuasion and coercion. So there is always a mix of the two. And condition of dominance, when the coercion becomes more than the persuasion, then the dominance becomes much more coercive. Right? So that the hegemony formation is, you don't get hegemony in the sense that the persuasion and the consent of the people. It depends on the coercive or the use of power, the use of the heavy-handedness of the state. And so you don't get. So he calls that as a dominance without hegemony. Where there is dominance, there is more coercion rather than persuasion and consent of the people. But what we have seen in the COVID case is a very anomalous kind of a thing. The anomaly was that there was both dominance and an hegemony. Why is it so? Because at one point, in the one hand, people were complaining about the exorbitant cost of the private healthcare. We have heard that just to get an admission, you will have to pay 1 lakh or 2 lakhs, and then you get an hospital bed in Delhi and other parts of the country. And the entire cost can run to 10 lakhs, 15 lakhs. And on the other hand, people also had and as we know, with all the migrant workers going back home and then the subsequent government announcement of various kind of measures, most of those were seen as inadequate because most of the government intervention was providing all types of loans to people rather than giving a direct subsidy to them. So people would complain against that. But they would submit themselves to the rest of the things that the state was trying to tell them. If the government asks them to go and lit a lamp, they will happily lit a lamp. If the government says go and beat a drum or a utensil and make some noise, so people will do that. So what it does is that at one level we are continuously complaining about various economic part of our life, but when it comes to the cultural part, we seem to be very much with the government. And we have also submitted, as I said right at the beginning, that to the various kind of government directives and so on. Most of the time, when it was locked down, people stayed at home and all of that. People didn't resist. The opposition parties didn't resist. The civil society did not resist. So we have submitted ourselves to the state and its directive. So we have followed what the state has told us. And what it therefore shows is that the way this power now operates is that the economic and the cultural part in the country there's a gap between them. And the state is in the middle, trying to not allow these two things to come together, where you also challenge the government in terms of its economic policies, you also challenge the government in its cultural policies and so on. And they seem to be operating the two different domains completely, with the state in between moderation. So I think that's what it reveals. So, and that's where I'll stop. Thank you. Hello. Hello. Anyone has any?
No, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Please unmute yourself and ask. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Good morning, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, Satya, you have any question?
Yes, yes, sir. What about the economic package of the government?
Hello.
Hello,
Yeah.
sir. I will put it in the chat box, sir.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. Go ahead. Hello. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Hello,
Yeah.
sir. My name is Sandeep. Good
Okay.
morning. Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
I mean, my question is like you have mentioned the coronavirus crisis in the context of both in European countries and in the context of India. So my
Yeah.
question is, I mean, despite the early measures of the top leadership in India, uh,
Yeah.
we have not contained the virus yet. So uh, whether we have seen in Europe, there were some parallels when they uh, they I mean they uh, stopped the transport. The country went into lockdown. But in case of India, it was completely disaster. So I mean, whether it was the complete mismanagement of the state or whether it was the poor healthcare system of a poor country like India, or
Yeah. Yeah.
is it the population density that have uh, created the situation that we have now facing?
Yeah. So if you see what has happened, I just switched off my video because I think there's some problem with the internet. So I can't hear properly. So that's why I've done. So can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir, I can
Can you
hear
hear
you.
me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the reason for this that why after all this lockdown and so on, India still is very very close to almost becoming the world's second. We are now world's third largest infected country, and very soon by the first week of September we will be the second largest. The reason for that is simply that Indian, as I said, that this shows the anomaly in our power structure, that we are good at policing, in using the coercive forces, in deploying police, but we don't have a healthcare system. You see, Europe did the same. It was hesitant, it did all of that, but Europe still has a lower number than most of the other countries, even percentage wise. The reason for that is Europe has a very, very good healthcare system. So if you see, many of the European countries have opened up. If you see UK, for instance, much of the society has been opened up. It's They have allowed people to the things that we are still restricting. Things like gathering in the pubs and restaurants and the cinema halls and things like parks. They have opened all these public spaces where people can go back. Most of Europe is gradually normalizing, but India still continues to, we have opened our economic activities, but not our recreational, any other social spaces. Our colleges and schools are still closed. So that's why we are doing this here. So similar thing is there also, in US, one might say, then US is also in an Indian kind of situation. And the reason for such an outcome in US, because US actually tried to undermine the entire thing. USA undermined the entire thing. The Trump administration did not take it seriously right at the beginning, and as a result, it has suffered. And it's more about an extreme libertarian approach where they thought that we cannot allow, dying is more preferable than the death of the citizens are more preferred than the death of the economy. That was the ideology which has operated there.
now in India, as I said, that in India we were good at lockdowns and all of that. But during that lockdown, we did not put in place the proper healthcare system because it still didn't exist. Overnight, you cannot create hospitals. So we have seen India creating makeshift beds in all the, in Bombay and in Delhi and other places, or some other stadiums have been converted into COVID hospitals and so on. It only shows that how inadequate India's health infrastructure is, how inadequate the various kind of social infrastructure. What has happened over the years, we have also, the various kind of health people who will have contact in the house to house, who knows people in the community and so on. That structure has not come up. Where it existed, it has over the years have been neglected. So as a result, when this lockdown was done, what was also required is a house to house survey, house to house, going around and looking at taking temperature of people or taking their random sampling and all of that. This enormous exercise which was required was simply not there. The state which managed slightly better compared to other states is Kerala, because Kerala had that basic infrastructure in place. Primary healthcare system was there. Most of India doesn't. So I think that is what it shows, that you cannot simply develop a very strong police state. And India has invested enormously over the last few years in developing, say, for instance, the Aadhaar, then the new kind of police forces have come up. There has been more, and there is a reason for that. India was threatened by terrorism for a very long time and internal disturbances and so on. So all of those things was done. But it has come parallel to this. The social infrastructure should also have been developed, which has not been the case. And as a result, what we have seen is that the lack of that cannot be overnight created. So you can bring police on the street and make people to stay at home, but that's not going to how you are going to control the diseases. You need people, healthcare workers and social workers and so on, who will do this community level monitoring, community level provision of services. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yeah. Hello. Yes. So if
Yes,
you have
sir.
finished, please mute yourself and let somebody else speak, or whoever has stopped speaking, please unmute yourself. And if you want to ask question, then whoever has finished talking, please mute yourself, and whoever wants to talk, please unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. My question is related to the economic package which was announced. Yeah. So, to what extent the economic package announced by the government created confidence in people?
Okay.
We still see lockdown in we still see lockdown.
So
in many cities.
if you see what the government has done is that it has treated this situation as what we call, the government economic interventions. When it intervenes, it tries to see the situation in two ways. One is the demand side intervention, and another is the supply side intervention. So what the government saw, what the problem in India was a problem of demand, right? That people don't have enough money at hand, so they're not going to spend enough, so they're not going to consume enough. And if that happens, then the demand in the economy goes down. And if the economy in the demand goes down in the economy, then the production and the entire upward chain will also slow down or even can collapse. So that is what has happened in this case, that the demand has gone down. What has also the related problem to is the solvency problem. So what does this solvency problem is that whether the companies at the various kind of firms which exist in the country, those who produce all the businesses, whether they are economically viable any longer, or they have a really serious crisis in their balance sheets and they might collapse. So what has happened is the government has treated this as not as this demand or solvency problem. Government has seen this as a supply side problem, which means that there is not enough, and supply side and liquidity, which means that liquidity means cash in the economy or money flowing in the economy. So government thought that most of these private firms, they don't have enough money at hand to start production. So that then creates a supply side problem, because if they're not producing, then there's not enough in the society to provide all the supplies to the people. So the only way of starting that is giving money at the hands of the factory owners and so on, so that they can hire people and start the production. So that's why government has gone. So government which followed the worldwide, if you see, various government had various kind of policies. So both in US and various European countries, particularly UK, went into the demand side and solvency side intervention, which means that what the UK government has done, that they have taken the wage liability of private firms. So if you have a company and you cannot pay wages to your workers, then government steps in and government pays the wages on your behalf and they have said that they will do it for 3-6 months. And what they have also done is that so that the companies don't collapse, they have also bought shares and all of that in a temporary measures. So, and the third thing that UK and other governments have done, as well as US, is that they have directly given money at the hands of the people, so that everybody gets some money from the government. So the idea is that if I get, say, today 1,000 rupees from government, then possibly I will go and spend that money in the market and thereby increase the effective demand in the economy. In India, that has not happened. Direct money to the people, very few of them were given. Money which has come, say, to the farmers and so on, which we have seen, were already due. So though that amount has been released, but no new fund has been given to at people's hand. So what people have got, so all the companies and others have got, following this liquidity and supply side principle, is basically giving loans to people. So they're not getting it free. They will have to get loans on a favorable terms. But taking the loan is always risky, because if your economy is already in contraction, if the economy is not flourishing, there's not effective demand, then giving loan can have two impacts. Is that one is that people might be fearful, the owners of factories might be fearful of taking the loans because they don't know whether they will be able to service that loan. And the other thing which can happen, which has happened earlier as well, is creation of the non-performing assets, that people take loan and they simply don't return it back. And so as a result, these new loans can very well turn into bad loans in the future, in the near future, and people will not repay back. So these interventions will therefore not have the projected outcome which the government wants. Hello?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so this is B.Sc. So my question is, basically we talked about protectionism and the rise of sun soft soils theory during the COVID pandemic, which also led to racism and xenophobia globally, which we saw, whether it was the US president calling the virus as a Chinese virus, and especially in India, we saw immense racism against the Northeast Indians, where they were attacked and targeted.
Yeah.
So how did the government of India, in your opinion, tackle this, or failed in tackling this xenophobia in our country?
Yeah. No, I think that is very much true about all those. So as I said that, if you follow what Bang Chul Han was arguing, and he was arguing that Europe has gone back to this very protectionist measure about withdrawing itself from the world and erecting fence and so on around it, and becoming very concerned that the healthcare facilities that they have will only be available to its own citizens, not to the outside, not to the refugees. So all of a sudden, many of the European countries suspended, I think, except for Portugal, which gave new rights to the refugees. Most of the countries refused to offer any kind of healthcare to the refugees and so on. So worldwide, that has happened. And what also one needs to see is that it's not only the COVID, but what is going on in the world before the pandemic started, that the worldwide, the societies are polarized, the extreme ideologies are in place. So almost the societies are divided into camps, and enormous amount of racism, xenophobia, and all of those things exist in almost all the societies now. So the moment this virus came in US, for instance, Trump has been, if you see that, the Black Lives Matters, which after George Floyd's death re-emerged during this pandemic, but the Black Lives Matters has been there for even before that, during the Obama's period itself. So what has happened is that the moment the head of the state goes and points out that the virus is Chinese, these are outsiders who are invading, the refugees are bringing this disease to us, the outsiders are bringing this disease to our country, we are good and clean, outsiders are coming and doing harm to us. The moment the top leadership adopts that line, what it does is that it in a way justifies and ratifies the polarization, ratifies the racism and xenophobia, then the society itself starts reacting to it. And the unfortunate thing in India is that we already have this polarized society. So it was very easy to point out to the Tablighi Jamaat as the super spreader, because you have the Muslims as, who don't care about the country. They are potential terrorists. So they are like using their bodies as a biological weapon, and then they're spreading the disease. And then what we have also seen is that the virus is Chinese. So the Chinese are our new enemy. They are attacking our borders, taking away our land. So we need to go and, attack them. So that has been both in a way official, unofficial. Sometimes the government on these issues, it's not the government is going to come and say that, okay, fine, China is our, the Muslims are our enemy or China is our enemy. That's openly nobody is going to say. But what happens through the various actions, the various kind of formal, informal tweets, the ministers writing on their own capacity, tweeting them, or government not taking any action against anyone who is found to be discriminating and so on. So in a way, unofficially, these things are accepted. And once that the society gets that signal, the social elements, they also start behaving in the same fashion in a much more in an aggressive manner. So that is what has happened in the case of the Northeast, that because the Northeast being seen, as an not like the mainland India, not as an mainstream Indians, but somebody who is like the other people who look different from us, who speak different language. And so they are seen as, in a way, not so Indian. And this is something has existed for a very long time. There are clashes in Delhi neighborhoods every time. They are accused of eating dogs and so on. So that then, is a continuation of that. And then the moment this virus is seen as something which has originated in the East as a Chinese virus, so obviously these are the people who were also immediately targeted. There were racial slurs and so on. So I think, so one needs to understand this process is not that what something like COVID creates. Most of the time, everything is not created anew in the society. Society has its own continuity. Society, all of these biases and various kind of discrimination, etc., they continue in the society. At various times, they intensify, and then they subside, and so on. It's like a wavy pattern it follows. Right now, what we have seen is that the COVID and the kind of political environment that we have in the country, that has exaggerated all of this and intensified all of these racial abuses in India, and as we have seen in the countries abroad as well. Anybody else? Hello? Hello? Hello.
Thank you, sir, for your explanation.
Okay. Anybody else? Hello. Okay.
Thank you, Swagato.
Okay, so Mani, I think we are done. So thank you everyone
Okay.
for joining us today, and hope